Wednesday, February 11th, 2026, and the situation has gotten dramatically worse. The polar vortex collapse we've been tracking is now accelerating beyond what anyone predicted, and latest forecast models show this could be the most devastating atmospheric breakdown in recorded history. We're not just talking about cold temperatures anymore. We're looking at a complete reorganization of global weather patterns that could send March temperatures plummeting to levels not seen since the Little Ice Age. The stratospheric warming event has reached unprecedented intensity with temperature anomalies of +140°C at the 10 millibar level, and the polar vortex is literally splitting in half as we speak. What's happening right now in the Arctic stratosphere is going to rewrite the weather story for the rest of winter and possibly extend this Arctic nightmare well into spring. This is no longer a typical winter weather event. This is atmospheric chaos, and millions of people are about to experience the coldest conditions of their lifetimes. The latest high-resolution model data from the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts is showing something that has never been documented before. The polar vortex split that we predicted for mid-February has not only begun, but it's happening with such violence and intensity that meteorologists are struggling to find historical comparisons. Temperature anomalies in the stratosphere have reached +4° above normal at the 10 millibar level, which represents one of the most extreme stratospheric warming events ever recorded. What makes this event so unprecedented is not just its intensity, but its timing and structure. We're seeing the polar vortex literally tear itself apart, with one lobe being displaced toward northern Eurasia and the other extending toward northeastern Canada and Greenland. This isn't a gradual weakening. This is a catastrophic structural failure of the entire polar circulation system that normally keeps the Arctic cold locked away from the rest of us. The stratospheric signal is now coupling with the troposphere much faster than anyone anticipated. Normally, these stratospheric warming events take weeks to impact surface weather. But we're seeing the effects already, with Arctic air masses that have been building over northern Canada now being released in waves across North America. The temperature departures we're measuring are beyond anything in the historical record for this time of year. Here's what's particularly terrifying about this setup. The high-pressure blocking pattern that's developed over Greenland and the Arctic is so intense and persistent that it's creating what atmospheric scientists are calling a polar traffic jam. Cold air that would normally circulate around the Arctic is instead being forced south in massive, unprecedented surges that could bring temperatures 40 to 50 degrees below normal to areas that haven't seen cold like this in over a century. The Madden-Julian oscillation interference that we thought might provide some temporary relief has proven to be completely overwhelmed by the scale of this stratospheric breakdown. Initially, forecasters hoped that this tropical atmospheric wave would shield parts of the central and eastern United States from the worst effects of the polar vortex collapse. But the latest data shows that the stratospheric forcing is so strong that it's overpowering any moderating influences from the tropics. What we're seeing now is a textbook example of what happens when multiple atmospheric systems fail simultaneously. The La Niña pattern that's been weakening in the Pacific has removed one of the stabilizing influences on our jet stream. Without that tropical stability, the atmosphere has become much more susceptible to the extreme disruptions we're seeing from the stratosphere. It's like removing the shock absorbers from a car and then hitting a massive pothole. There's nothing left to dampen the impact. The European Model Ensemble forecasts are now showing the polar vortex remaining split and displaced through at least the end of March, which would make this the longest-lasting stratospheric disruption event in the modern observational record. We're not talking about a few weeks of cold weather. We're potentially looking at a fundamental shift in the atmospheric pattern that could persist for months. What's particularly concerning is how this is affecting the jet stream configuration. The polar jet has become so distorted and weakened that it's allowing Arctic air masses to penetrate much further south than would normally be possible. We're seeing Arctic air reaching areas of Texas, Louisiana, and Florida that simply don't have the infrastructure or experience to deal with this level of cold. The Canadian warming pattern that's developed as part of this collapse is unlike anything in the meteorological record. Instead of the warming being centered over the North Pole, as is typical in these events, the maximum warming is positioned over northern Canada. This geographic displacement is creating an unprecedented pressure gradient that's acting like a massive atmospheric pump, continuously drawing Arctic air out of its normal reservoirs and pushing it into populated areas. The surface pressure patterns we're seeing are absolutely remarkable. The blocking high over Greenland has reached intensity levels typically associated with summer heat domes, but it's occurring in the middle of winter at high latitudes. This creates a pressure differential so extreme that it's generating winds strong enough to transport Arctic air masses thousands of miles from their source regions. Looking at the temperature forecasts for the next 2 weeks, we're seeing projected anomalies that would have been considered impossible just a few years ago. Parts of the northern plains could see temperatures drop to 40 or even 50 degrees below normal, with some areas potentially reaching temperatures that haven't been recorded since the 1800s. The wind chill values could reach life-threatening levels across vast areas of the country. What makes this particularly dangerous is the speed at which this pattern is evolving. Typically, these large-scale atmospheric changes take place gradually over several weeks, giving infrastructure and ecosystems time to adapt. But this polar vortex collapse is happening so rapidly that there's no time for adjustment. Power grids, water systems, and agricultural operations that were designed for normal winter conditions are about to be tested by Arctic conditions that are far beyond their design parameters. The agricultural implications alone could be devastating. Fruit trees and other perennial crops that survived the earlier winter storms are now facing the prospect of temperatures so low that they could cause permanent damage to root systems that have been in the ground for decades. Livestock operations across the northern tier of states are implementing emergency protocols typically reserved for the most extreme Arctic conditions. Energy infrastructure is also at critical risk. The combination of extreme cold and potentially high winds could create massive demand spikes for heating just as transmission systems become vulnerable to weather-related failures. We could see rolling blackouts across large areas as utilities struggle to balance supply and demand under conditions they've never experienced before. But here's what might be the most concerning aspect of this entire situation. The climate models that we use to understand and predict these events don't have good analogs for what we're seeing. The polar vortex collapses in the historical record were either smaller in magnitude or occurred under different background climate conditions. We're in uncharted territory, both literally and figuratively. The ocean patterns are also playing a role in amplifying this event. The North Atlantic sea surface temperatures are running well above normal, which is creating additional energy that's being pumped into the atmospheric system. This extra heat is actually making the stratospheric warming more intense and longer lasting than it would be under normal oceanic conditions. Arctic sea ice patterns are contributing to the problem as well. The relatively low ice coverage in some areas is allowing more heat transfer from the ocean to the atmosphere, which is helping to sustain the high pressure patterns that are driving this entire event. It's a complex feedback system where multiple components of the climate system are reinforcing each other in ways that are making this collapse more severe than anyone anticipated. The European model is now showing the possibility of additional stratospheric warming pulses throughout March, which could extend this pattern well into what should be the spring season. If these secondary warming events materialize, we could be looking at below normal temperatures persisting across much of North America through the end of March or even into early April. International implications are significant as well. The polar vortex collapse is affecting not just North America, but also sending cold air masses into Europe and Asia. The blocking patterns that are developing could disrupt normal storm tracks across the Atlantic, potentially affecting everything from European agriculture to North Sea oil operations. Aviation is already being impacted, with extreme cold affecting aircraft performance and airport operations across large areas. The combination of low temperatures and strong winds is creating conditions that are beyond the operational limits for many aircraft systems, leading to widespread flight cancellations and delays that could persist for weeks. The psychological impact on populations that aren't used to extreme cold shouldn't be underestimated either. Areas of the South that are experiencing temperatures 30 to 40 degrees below normal are seeing unprecedented demand for mental health services as people struggle to cope with conditions that are completely outside their experience. Looking at the extended forecast models, there's growing concern that this polar vortex collapse could be part of a larger pattern shift that affects not just the remainder of this winter, but potentially influences next winter as well. The stratospheric circulation typically reforms during the spring and summer months, but if the disruption is severe enough, it could have lasting effects on the atmospheric pattern that persist through multiple seasons. Emergency management agencies across the northern tier of states are implementing protocols typically reserved for natural disasters. The combination of extreme cold, potential infrastructure failures, and extended duration of the event is creating a perfect storm of challenges that could overwhelm normal response capabilities. What we're witnessing right now is atmospheric science in real time. But unfortunately, it's the kind of science that comes with devastating real-world consequences. The polar vortex collapse of 2026 is likely to be studied and referenced for decades as an example of how quickly and dramatically large-scale atmospheric systems can change, and how unprepared we can be for events that fall outside the range of our historical experience. The bottom line is that we're entering a phase of winter weather that has no modern precedent. The combination of the stratospheric warming intensity, the polar vortex split geometry, and the supporting atmospheric patterns is creating conditions that could redefine what we consider possible in terms of winter weather extremes. Anyone in the path of this Arctic outbreak needs to be prepared for conditions that are likely to be the most extreme they've ever experienced, and that could persist far longer than any previous cold event in living memory. As always, thank you for watching Michael Carter Weather. This is a developing situation that represents one of the most significant atmospheric events of our lifetimes. Stay tuned to your local National Weather Service forecasts, have emergency supplies ready, and prepare for what could be the most challenging period of winter weather in modern history. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any critical updates on this historic polar vortex collapse. This is not just another cold snap. This is atmospheric chaos, and everyone needs to be ready. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.